2019 is the worst. Before we begin, we publish new content every day, so be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. For this list, we're taking a look at the reasons why the 2019 Hellboy movie failed both as a reboot of Guillermo del Toro's films and as an adaptation of Mike Mignola's comics. For anyone who's still interested in seeing the movie anyway, keep in mind there will be a couple of spoilers. Number 10. It has the nerve to tease sequels. A bad movie is one thing, but a bad movie that tries to get us hyped for future installments is simply insulting. Hellboy has not one, not two, but 3 endings that suggest more is on the way, whether we like it or not. Between the Abe Sapien reveal, Lobster Johnson's ghost, and Baba Yaga's conversation with Cachet, the studio seems pretty confident that a sequel is inevitable. Even with a reportedly modest production budget of $50 million though, the film's opening weekend box office performance fell well below expectations. As for the critical response, let's just say nobody was clamoring for a follow-up. Whatever happens next, this sequel bait looks about as appetizing as the ones from The Last Airbender and Green Lantern. Number 9. The lackluster soundtrack.
The best you.
Some dads get their kids Legos.
Imagine hitching a ride with someone who insists on listening to a playlist comprised of repetitive rock music. At first, it's just a little distracting, but after 2 hours, you're seriously tempted to jump out of the moving vehicle. That basically sums up this movie's soundtrack. Don't get us wrong, Scorpions' Rock You Like a Hurricane, Motley Crue's Kickstart My Heart, and Alice Cooper's Welcome to My Nightmare are all badass songs. When every action sequence is set to a rock song we've heard a million times before, however, it's about as pleasant as fingernails on the chalkboard. Benjamin Wallfish is a talented composer, but his musical score here sounds like the grungy version of Hans Zimmer's most generic works. Number 8. A waste of a promising cast.
Why do you fight for those who hate and fear you?
Many fans were skeptical of this reboot from the moment it was announced, but people started to come around when David Harbour of Stranger Things was cast as Hellboy. The addition of cult actors like Ian McShane and Mila Jovovich, as well as promising up-and-comers like Sasha Lane, only gave us more reason to be optimistic. Alas, all of them are squandered in a screenplay plagued by one-dimensional characters. The material is deprived of anything resembling humor or humanity, giving the cast little to sink their teeth into. Everyone comes off as if they don't even understand half of the dialogue they're spouting. Worst of all, Oscar nominees like Thomas Hayden Church and Sophie Okonedo are designated to bit parts that go absolutely nowhere. Number 7. Packing in too many characters. If Infinity War and Into the Spider-Verse proved anything, it's that balancing a large cast of characters is not impossible. Unfortunately, Hellboy is in the tradition of X-Men The Last Stand or Spider-Man 3, shoehorning in more players than it knows what to do with. Characters like Baba Yaga and Witch Elder Ganaida are introduced with little context and then disappear before we learn anything about them.
Baba Yaga.
We'd say that Lobster Johnson's glorified cameo is pure fan service, but his appearance is so rushed that fans are inclined to be disappointed. Although the main characters are all given complex backstories, we never come to identify with any of them. There's a big difference between telling us someone's origins and actually fleshing out a character. Number 6. A waste of an R rating.
Where's my violin?
Following in the footsteps of Deadpool and Logan, Hellboy promoted itself as a grown-up superhero movie with a hard R rating. Rather than coming up with clever uses for 4-letter words like Deadpool though, this film randomly inserts F-bombs into every other sentence. Hellboy drapes itself in just as much blood and gore as Logan did, but the carnage means nothing when there's no investment in the characters or story. The only demographic likely to get a kick out of all the gratuitous swearing and violence is the 12-year-old boy crowd, who aren't even old enough to purchase a ticket. This goes to show that just because a movie receives an R rating does not mean that it's adult.
But this is not gonna work, you know, because I'm a Capricorn and you're nuts!
Number 5. The inconsistent tone.
I thought we were supposed to be fighting monsters, not working with them.
Who you calling monster, pal? You look in the mirror recently?
We get the impression that this movie was trying to replicate the twisted imagination of Sam Raimi, who brought us gleefully gruesome flicks like Drag Me to Hell and the Evil Dead trilogy. The film's fusion of horror and medieval fantasy particularly calls Army of Darkness to mind.
Come to Papa. Get him!
Whereas those cult classics all had a playful sense of humor though, this film feels like it was made by a teenager who wants to prove how edgy he can be. Hellboy takes itself too seriously to function as a self-aware B-movie or a loving tribute to pulp magazines. The film has more in common with the joyless I, Frankenstein or Gods of Egypt, both of which just so happen to be under the Lionsgate umbrella.
I, my father's son. I, Frankenstein.
Number 4. The horrible special effects. To be fair, the film's practical effects aren't entirely without merit, and the creature design is beyond inventive, which is to be expected with an Oscar-winning makeup artist like Joel Harlow on board.
I mean, he's a genius.
Whenever Hellboy resorts to CGI though, it looks like something that was simulated in the early 90s. With an over-reliance on green screen and CGI puppets, the film constantly gives the audience flashbacks to 1997's Spawn. Of course, whereas that movie at least had the excuse of being a product of its time, Hellboy came out in 2019 for Satan's sake. Maybe these effects would have been acceptable if Hellboy had taken the B-movie route and fully embraced its corniness. Yet the filmmakers honestly expect us to be impressed by Nintendo 64 quality graphics.
You have to see it to believe it.
Number 3. The incomprehensible plot.
You can usher in the apocalypse. Out of the ashes, a new Eden will emerge.
How can a movie that covers World War II, the Arthurian legend, and Russian folklore be boring? Actually, maybe we just answered our own question. When a movie throws this many ingredients into one pot, it's bound to leave an inconsistent taste in your mouth.
The British Occult Society, formed in 1866 by the ranking members of the Heliopic Brotherhood of Ra.
Ra?
It's difficult to make heads or tails of this film's incomprehensible plot, as our heroes jump from one set piece to another. When the characters aren't spewing exposition, they're partaking in action sequences that are edited so choppily that you can't even tell what's going on. Hellboy is paced less like a movie and more like a video game, where the boss fights take precedence over the story. Unfortunately, this film doesn't come with a controller.
Okay, I'd appreciate a prophecy with more relatable stakes.
Number 2. The production problems are evident.
The fact that I get to be part of Hellboy, and I sort of got to pinch myself. I can't believe it.
Shortly after the film's release, news broke that tensions reached a boiling point on the Hellboy set. According to insiders, a power struggle arose between director Neil Marshall and the producers, specifically Lawrence Gordon and Lloyd Levin. The producers allegedly gave Marshall's longtime cinematographer Sam McCurdy the boot, asserting that they were in charge. The director and producers also reportedly clashed over how a tree should look, while Star Harbor stormed off set in frustration more than once. As was the case with Fantastic Four and Suicide Squad, the production problems really shine through in the final product. A film this jumbled clearly didn't come from one artist with a vision, but rather a group of people who couldn't agree on anything. Talk about production hell. Number 1. We'll never see Guillermo del Toro's third Hellboy movie because of it.
I hate those comic books. They never get the eyes right.
Hellboy.
This movie is guilty of numerous sins, but the greatest travesty is that the Hellboy franchise was doing pretty well until now. Granted, Guillermo del Toro's 2 Hellboy films weren't huge moneymakers, but they were critically acclaimed, beloved by fans, and all-around visual marvels. Del Toro and actor Ron Perlman spent years trying to get a third movie off the ground. In 2017, however, Del Toro confirmed that his trilogy would never be completed. So instead, we got a soulless reboot deprived of the emotional gravitas, over-the-top action, or colorful production values that made Del Toro's films stand out. Now that Del Toro is an Oscar winner, we can only hope Hellboy will land back in his lap, but it appears there's no escaping development hell.
Now stay down!
Do you agree with our picks? Check out these other great clips from WatchMojo, and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.